Hello and welcome to today's Efikos webinar titled Powering Africa's Future with Gas, Challenges, Opportunities and Future Trends. Thank you so much for taking out time to join us today. We've got an excellent group of speakers to share their insights and perspectives with us today, and I can't wait to hear from them. My name is Debola Adeyemo, and I'm delighted to be your anchor for today's webinar. Just to let you know a few housekeeping items, a recorded version of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel and LinkedIn page, and all registered attendees will also receive a copy of the presentation deck by email. So just to tell you a bit more about myself, I'm a chartered engineer focused on process safety engineering. I've got a lot of experience in the oil industry across the entire value chain, and my current focus area is in operations and defining future concepts for how to create simpler, safer hydrocarbon and clean energy projects for the future. A little bit about us as a group, the Efikos, if you haven't attended any of our webinars previously. We're a group of experienced professionals passionate about energy and economic development in Sub-Saharan Africa, and we aim to bring together a diverse group of stakeholders, practitioners, and people with interest across the energy and economic value chains. Our aim is to share knowledge and expertise to create value and to create a platform to support growth and development of the energy industry and economies in Sub-Saharan Africa and beyond. So just to give you a feel of what our agenda will be for today, we'll go through a bit of an introduction, which I will lead. I'll introduce our speakers. We'll have a few presentations from them. Then we'll go into a panel discussion followed by Q&A. So to set the scene, as many of you will be aware, there's a strong desire for countries to build back better as the world economy begins to recover from the pandemic, including transforming energy systems to achieve the Paris Agreement's climate goals and also the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. With Sub-Saharan Africa having the lowest energy access rates in the world, there is nowhere with a greater challenge to achieving this goal. However, in addition to the challenges already present, the pandemic has arguably made things even more difficult, with a 3.3% decline in growth in Africa in 2020, its first recession in 25 years. So that's kind of the backdrop. Now, to give you a sense of the scale of the challenge, let's examine two energy categories in line with the UN's Sustainable Goal number 7, which aims to ensure access to affordable, reliable and modern energy sources for all by 2030. In Africa, you have two areas which I've focused on for today, which is electricity and clean cooking. So over the past number of years, we've been able to increase the number of people gaining access to electricity, and between 2014 and 2019, about 20 million people were gaining access to electricity in a year, which was outpacing population growth and much better than the 9 million a year that had been achieved previously. And we're currently at about 48% of the African population, Sub-Saharan African population, with access to electricity. And if we continue with current trends, we can project forward, as done by the International Energy Agency, we may only reach 62% by 2030. So well below the aims of the Sustainable Development Goals. This would result in about 560 million people without access to electricity in Sub-Saharan Africa if we don't improve that. To flip it over to clean cooking, about 25 million additional people have gained access to clean cooking fuels since 2015. But currently, only about 17% of the African population has access to clean cooking fuels. And based on current projections, we're only likely to increase that to 30% by 2030. So that just gives you a sense of the scale of the challenge we're talking about here. So now let's look at a potential path to achieving those sustainable development goals. The International Energy Agency has developed a sustainable development scenario, which combines ambitious climate policies with significant action on achieving energy access, as I've described on the Sustainable Development Goal 7. So this tries to describe how Africa could achieve the stated goals by 2030 and is premised on Agenda 2063, which is the continent's own vision of accelerated economic and industrial development. This was established by heads of states and governments of the African Union in 2015 and has been incorporated into national planning frameworks in over 30 countries. So I've got two charts you can see there on screen. The top one showing you a potential pathway to achieving full-scale access for electricity by 2030. And the key aspect I want to draw your attention to is that grid extension and densification is the least cost option for nearly 45% of the population gaining access by 2030. And this comprises of base load generation, which can, for many countries, be relatively easily accessed using gas. Also, you have about 30% being supplied by mini grids and standalone systems for around a quarter. Turning to clean cooking fuels, LPG in this projection is used by over 50% of those gaining access to clean cooking in urban areas, while improved cook stoves is the preferred solution in rural areas. So effectively, what this begins to paint a picture of is there is a huge role for natural gas to play in the path to achieving those sustainable development goals, allowing the entire continent's population to have access to clean energy. And then finally, let me talk about the opportunity. Natural gas is abundant in Africa, and over 40% of gas discoveries worldwide were made in Africa between 2011 and 2018. Given the low levels of energy access and industrialization in Sub-Saharan Africa, there is a unique opportunity for the continent to pursue a low carbon development model here. And by that, I mean, Africa does not need to first develop an energy intensity or high energy intensity economic model and then seek to decarbonize later. There is an opportunity now to build and grow in a cleaner way, combining ambitious climate policy with significant action on achieving energy access and cleaner air. So there's a great opportunity there, and that's what we want to learn about and get a better sense of from our speakers today. So on that note, I'll introduce our first speaker of the day. Dayo Olayode is a friend of the house, having appeared in one of our previous Efikos webinars last year. He's got vast experience across financial advisory, project finance, investment, evaluation, and planning, and has worked extensively in the oil and gas industry. Aside from all those sterling qualifications and experience, Dayo is also very skilled at handling a charcoal grill. So, he didn't ask me to say this, but if you're ever interested in someone to give you some premium grilled products, Dayo is probably your man. Our second speaker will be Muji Yamabo. She is currently a gas and commercial manager at a large energy company in Nigeria and has extensive experience spanning 18 years in audit, merger acquisition, corporate finance and accounting, and oil and gas business development. She's been responsible for commercializing gas assets in excess of 3 billion, and as you can see, is highly qualified with an MBA in finance and strategic management from the Wharton Business School. Aside from her academic qualifications, she's also a member of the Oil Producers Trade Association, and also an ardent fitness fan and a hardcore football fan, and a member of a choir in a local church. So, apart from all her sterling qualifications, again, I think I'll want to speak to Muji separately just to understand how she manages to include all of that into her hectic career as well. Last but not least, our third speaker will be Olayemi Odutola, and he's a certified project management professional with a bachelor's degree in material science and engineering and a master's in business administration from the University of Bradford. He's got vast experience across the energy value chain over 15 years and currently is an energy business development manager in Cote d'Ivoire. It's been responsible for commercial asset management and trading in excess of $600 million. And I think for me personally, you know, prior to now, I didn't know anyone who actually lived in Cote d'Ivoire, and I've always wanted to make a trip across West Africa. So Yemi has definitely provided me an anchor point in Cote d'Ivoire, so I can take off travel expenses at least for that leg of the journey. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on Dayo Olayode now to talk about gas supply perspectives. Dayo, over to you.
All righty. Hi guys. Good evening. Glad to be back here. I hope you all can hear me well. So, like Debola mentioned, I'm just talking about gas supply today, and just to provide a kind of backdrop from the upstream, how gas is viewed, and then the gas experts will take it from me. So if we can move to the next slide, please. And I mean, from this chart, I just wanted to show from the two charts on the left, just provide some kind of context as to how much gas we have in the ground. The blue bars show you the amount of oil, and then the orange bar shows you the amount of gas we have across the sub-region. And you notice that, yeah, we have a lot of oil, but we also have a lot of gas. I mean, 35 billion barrels of gas available in Nigeria alone. But if you now look at the chart on the bottom, it's surprising that of the 65 billion barrels of oil we have, say in Nigeria, and the almost 30 billion barrels of oil we have so much, a lot of it has been produced. As you know, we produce a lot of oil in Nigeria and Angola especially. And if you look at the gas, you'll notice that the gas has not really moved down. So there's a lot of gas in the ground, but for some reason, it's just in the ground. It's been in the ground for 40 years plus. And then you begin to worry what's actually happening to our gas supply. And the insight you can glean from this is that from a natural supply perspective, in terms of how much resource we've been blessed with as a sub-region, reserves are not an issue. We have enough gas reserves to power whatever we want to do. And then if you look at the chart at the bottom, you'll notice that we have more gas than oil in the region. So if you're looking at, oh, I want to actually explore and produce, there's actually more prospects from a resource perspective for gas than oil in the region. Now, what is the utilization status of this gas that we have in the ground? I mean, you would think that we should have commercial uses for our gas, use it for power, for cooking, to develop our sub-region, or at the very least sell it and get the foreign exchange in return for selling it and use the money to develop. But you notice that the bar is tilted towards left. We flare a lot of gas within the sub-region. A lot of gas is recycled back into operations because there's nothing else to do with it. And a significant amount of our gas resource, more than 80% of our gas resource, is left in the ground, just there. Nothing has been done about it. We've not developed, we've not done anything about it. On the flip side, what can we use this gas for? We've not done much in real commercial gas utilization. So the challenge here, and that's the point I want to leave this slide with. The challenge here is getting the gas from the ground to the areas of need. We have gas in the ground. We have a lot of need in the sub-region. We need to be able to match that demand for gas with the excess supply that we have. So that's the point from this slide. Okay, so we'll move to the next slide. Now, so like I said, I'm looking at it from a gas supply perspective. How can we unlock gas supply? What are the enablers? What are the limitations? What are the key success factors? That's KSFs, key success factors. Now, what I've tried to do on this slide is, group them into 4 broad categories of the things we need to look at. I'm not going to be to mince words. The most important for me is regulatory. Within the sub-region, there's a lot of flip-flop amongst our regulators, and it's a bit discouraging to people that want to invest. So the first thing we need to look at is how can we get the fiscals? Fiscals mean, your tax, how much government takes from what you produce, and what kind of incentives government will give you for investing from a tax perspective. How can we make the fiscals work? If you're going to attract investment to develop gas, then you need to ensure that there's enough incentives for people that want to invest. And then that way, the government is actually almost like providing subsidies or incentivizing producers to bring out this gas from the ground because we need it. Also, another thing is national content. Across the sub-region, because of our lack of competitiveness and our developing status, it's difficult for us to get things cheap. So our insistence on national content, for example, across the region, especially in places like Nigeria, Angola, kind of makes things more expensive. So our regulations around national content need to fit the objective, which is getting gas from the ground. The next thing is, in a country like Nigeria, we have the Petroleum Industry Bill, which has identified that gas is a big part of our future as a country in Nigeria, and is trying to unlock it. But as we speak, the PIB has not been passed. So you need to have regulations in place that encourage gas, but you also need to pass them. So at the moment, I don't know when it's going to be passed. Secondly is the pricing. There's a lack of competitive pricing in the region. To buy power, because gas is a global product, so it's priced in dollars. A lot of us don't have enough purchasing power to be able to pay. So because of that, there's not enough competitive pricing to encourage supply. It's almost like even if I supply this, nobody can buy it at the right price. And if I decide to sell it to countries around the world, the first issue I have is that we have security implications. The West African route is one of the most security sensitive ones. There's a lot of piracy around that route. And what happens is that it factors into the pricing for your gas. People that want to come in will then be charging you more as a supplier or be asking for more discounts. And when you have a saturated world supply market for gas, which is a global phenomenon, there's more than enough gas at the moment from Russia, from the US. People would then begin to look at, why do I need to come to West Africa where I might be my ship might be captured and my crew kidnapped. So the kind of security implications you have for export pricing, when you match it with the saturated world supply market, you suddenly have a situation where people just ignore the region in terms of export. The next thing is the infrastructure. Now, gas is a very capital intensive venture from an upstream perspective. There are pipelines to be built, there are gas plants to be built. And the question is, whose responsibility is it? As an investor, if you do not give me the good fiscal considerations, if there's no competitive pricing, why would I want to put in my dollars to invest in something that's not going to make me returns, especially when I can invest that kind of money somewhere else and make money? And because it's very capital intensive, there's a there's a need to then decide whose responsibility it is to build the infrastructure. I don't have the answer, but I'm just laying out what it is. So once we're able to define which responsibility it is, so if it's the investor's responsibility, how do we incentivize the investor? If it's the government's responsibility, how do we get government to know what to invest in? And then for the infrastructure, there are a lot of above ground risks. Across the region, you have things like pipeline vandalization, you have things like community unrest. All of those things come in and factor into the cost of the infrastructure. So suddenly something that will cost 1 billion, by the time you put in security, it goes to 1.5 billion. And then they affect the economics of your investment. Finally, from me, there are a lot more issues that you can look at in terms of how to unlock gas supply. One thing is climate change. As you know, there's a shift from oil and gas to renewables. So the question is, as a sub-region, do you want to move straight from oil to renewables, considering the fact that it's much more expensive, or do you want to move to something that's much cleaner, which is, say, gas? Gas is much cleaner than oil. So, you have to factor that in also. How many more years is gas going to be a preferred energy source? Also, the location of plants, it might be very small, but when you have a sub-region that is fraught with a lot of host communities with a lot of agitations, you need to be able to make decisions as to, where would we locate this plant? And the last one I'm going to talk about is contract sanctity. And I'm going to just talk about a quick one. There's a power plant in Nigeria called the Azura Power Plant, where the World Bank got involved. We went through the regulatory as a country. We're able to get these gas plants in place to provide power, and suddenly you have the government of the day in Nigeria saying that, oh, Azura looks like a scam. Suddenly, everything that you signed in the contract is now up in the air. So I've invested, as an investor, I've invested $2 or $3 billion in these power plants. I've got the infrastructure in place. I've been able to move from the regulatory to the pricing to the infrastructure. I've gone through all of that. And then at the point where I'm supposed to start making returns, the issue of contract sanctity comes in. And then at the moment, there's a bit of a conflict between Azura Power Plant and the Nigerian government as to the terms of the contract that were signed. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go on.
Okay, I just got a notification that there was a lost connection. So, Azura suddenly has a bone of contention with the government in terms of the contract that's been signed, which has the World Bank, which has a lot of international financing agencies involved in signing that. And at the point of execution, suddenly, when the plant is in place and we're supposed to start making money, there's now issues as to, oh, is this contract enforceable? Is it in the interest of the government? Is it in the interest of the Nigerian people? Those kind of things send a message to investors around the world that, are these people in this region really serious about, gas supply? Why would I have gone through all of this 10 years down investing, and then at the point when returns are supposed to come in, we start arguing about the contract that we signed? So, one of those other things is that as a region, we need to respect contracts that are signed to ensure that we, continue to encourage investment and unlock gas supply. So that's it from me. At the end of at the end of presentation, we would have questions, and I can probably elaborate a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dio, for that comprehensive overview of the supply picture. I think just for me, a few things there resonate very strongly. One is that the resource is not the issue. We definitely have the resource. We have to overcome those challenges that you've highlighted, some of which are legal, some of which are regulatory, and some of which are in, who actually has the deep pockets we need to fund some of these. So just for interest, for those of us listening, if you've just joined us, welcome to our webinar for today titled Powering Africa's Future with Gas. If you're interested in learning more about the legal framework for the oil and gas industry in Nigeria, for example, the Efikos have had a previous webinar on that, which touches on a few of the points that Dio has raised, just plugging our previous events on that one. So without further ado, I would like to invite Muji to come on, where she will be talking about gas utilization in West Africa. Welcome, Muji.
Thank you, Digbala. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And good evening, everyone, and good evening to my fellow panelists. And thank you to the Efikos group for inviting me as a panelist on today's webinar. So today, I'm obviously very passionate about the gas industry. It's an industry that I've been in for about 18 years, and it's one that I hope to continue to contribute to in any way that I can. So this evening, I will be speaking on gas utilization in West Africa. What's the current state? What are the opportunities, and what are the current challenges? So moving on to the next slide. Over the past 5 years or so, there's been a number of discoveries across the West African coast. If you think of countries like Ghana, Senegal, Mauritania, these are countries that have, over the last 5 years, discovered gas offshore. And this is very crucial in terms of the economic development and industrialization of these countries. So if you think of the Jubilee fields in Ghana or the Grand Tortue project in Senegal, these are all big gas projects that these are recent discoveries across West Africa. What this clearly shows is that the West Africa area remains very largely untapped in terms of the potential for gas discoveries. In West Africa today, Nigeria has the largest proven gas reserves and the ninth largest proven gas reserves in the world. So moving on to the next slide, it's obvious that resource is not the problem. We have this gas reserves, as Dayo mentioned. So the question is, how do we get the gas from the point of production to the off-taker? How do we ensure that this gas is not left in the ground and not commercialized? So to move the gas from one point to another, you need a transport infrastructure. And broadly speaking, you can either transport in two key ways. The first is either you have an actual physical pipeline or you have a virtual pipeline. In terms of the actual physical pipeline, there's just one inter-country pipeline across West Africa. I think it connects just about 4 countries across West Africa. It's called the West African Gas Pipeline System, WAPI for short. It's almost 700 kilometers in terms of length, and it starts onshore somewhere called Itoki in Nigeria. It's onshore until it gets to somewhere in Badagry and then goes offshore, and then finally terminates somewhere in Ghana in Takoradi. So if you think of Lagos to Ibadan, which is roughly about 100 kilometers in terms of distance, and you think of 7 times that, that will give you an idea of how long that pipeline is. In terms of capacity, that pipeline can transport about 800 million scoff per day of gas. So whether you're taking gas from Lagos to Cotonou in Benin, or to Lomé in Togo, or to Tema Takoradi in Ghana, that's your pipeline to use. Unfortunately, the capacity of the pipeline is severely underutilized, about 20% utilization. I think the flip side of that is I also see an opportunity to increase the number of people that ship gas on the WAPI. So if you have a project in, say, Lomé, you're trying to build a power plant, the good news is that there's an existing pipeline system that you can plug into and transport your gas to Lomé. Now, for countries that are not connected by the WAPI, so Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, other countries in West Africa, there's an option of using a virtual pipeline to transport gas. And by virtual pipeline, it could be in form of compressed natural gas, which is a process where you compress gas and you put it into bullets and then you truck it using trucks. Or you could also have liquefied natural gas, LNG for short, which is a process where you liquefy natural gas and also transport. You could also use a floating LNG barge, or you could use a ship or an FSRU, and then connect a short spur line from the ship to shore, to where your project is. So we've talked about the fact that, yes, we have the reserves. We've also talked about the existing infrastructure that we have across West Africa. So the question is, what are the opportunities? What can we actually use this gas to do in West Africa? So moving on to the next slide, you would see that from my perspective, I think gas can be utilized in 3 broad areas. The first is gas to industries. The second is gas to power. And the third is exports. So by gas to industry, what we mean by that is basically piping gas to industries. And these industries, whether you're a fertilizer plant or whether you are a cement company, what you can do is you get this gas and you use this gas for your processes. So you might have boilers. So instead of using HFO, heavy fuel oil, or using marine oil, or using diesel, it's cheaper to use gas. There's been studies that have shown that gas is at least 40% more cheaper than the next alternative. So you can pipe this gas to maybe industrial clusters. For example, in Ghana, they have the Tema industrial area where you have a cluster of industries, and you can pipe this gas for these industries to use for their processes. Some industries can also use the gas as fuel for power. So there are certain industries that are off-grid, And what that means is they're not connected to the national electricity distribution company. So they can also use the gas to power their IPPs or their power plants and provide power for their industries. The second main use for gas is gas to power. It may interest you to know that most of the gas that is commercialized, at least about 70%, goes for power. So this is just gas as a fuel for power plants. So instead of using coal or using hydro, you may decide to use gas for your power plant project. And lastly will be exports. So this is just exporting your gas out of your country. It could be within Africa, or it could be somewhere else in the world. If you look at how we've used gas in Nigeria, for example, you'll find out that most of our gas, if you look at the pie, most of our gas has actually gone out for export. So the export market, the LNG market, is also very active and is another opportunity for gas commercialization. So moving on to the next slide. So we've talked about the resource. We have the resource. We've talked about how to get the resource from the ground through infrastructure. And then we just also talked about what the opportunities are. So when you then decide on which opportunity to pursue, then you have to ask yourself, what would be my typical contracting structure? Obviously, this is just basics, and you'd probably need to amend this given the peculiarities of your particular project. But you typically have a project SPV. That's the company that's going to undertake the development of whatever project you're trying to do. You would need to sign, that project SPV would need to sign a gas supply agreement with the gas producer. That's the person that is bringing out the gas from the ground. And you also, if you're going to transport your gas through a physical pipeline, you need to sign a gas transport agreement. Depending on the location of where you're going to use the gas, you may need to sign more than one gas transport agreement. So for example, if I was going to sell gas from Nigeria to a power plant in Togo, for example, I'll need to sign one gas transportation agreement with Nigerian gas company, which is a transporter within Nigeria. Then I'll need to sign another gas transportation agreement with WAPCO. WAPCO is the company that operates the WAPP. So depending on the location of your project, you may need to sign more than one transport agreement. And then you'd also need to sign a gas purchase, sale and purchase agreement on the downstream side with the off-taker. So the person that you're selling gas to, if you're selling gas. If it's power that you're selling, then you need to sign maybe a power purchase agreement with the person that's going to be off-taking the power. But if you're going the virtual pipeline route, then you would need to think about LNG infrastructure development agreement and signing any other ancillary agreements that come with LNG development. So what are the challenges? What are the constraints that we currently see across West Africa? Daya has alluded to a number of this, so I will just move through them quickly. I think the first is infrastructure development. And I think I believe that the countries that are mostly affected by this are countries that discovered gas a long time ago. So there was not a lot of thought that was put into making sure that the infrastructure was connected and flexible. And those came as an afterthought. So it will be fantastic for us to see governments and also the private sector thinking of the infrastructure and making sure the infrastructure is connected and that it's flexible even before the gas is produced, so that you don't have a situation where you have gas and you're trying to produce the gas, but you can't move it from one point to another because there's no infrastructure, which is where we find ourselves today in Nigeria, where we have the very rich eastern part of Nigeria, and we have the gas demand centers in the west where we have most of our power plants. And we're just now trying to build OB3, which is a major transmission pipeline to link the east to the west. So infrastructure development, whether it's LNG, whether it's your gas processing plant, whether it's your pipelines, is a big constraint in the West African market. So for example, we have just one pipeline that connects just 4 countries in West Africa, and there are more than 4 countries in West Africa. Financing is a big issue. Gas projects are quite heavy on the capex side. So raising financing is also a constraint. Most developers find it difficult to raise financing, not because there's no financing. I think it's because the project hasn't been properly cooked, and that's mainly because our gas markets are not well developed, and I dare to say some of them are not very creditworthy off-takers. And if you don't have a project where you have the off-take agreement, is extremely key to any financing. And I just spoke about the markets. The markets need to be developed. They need to be ready to pay for the gas. Political risk across West Africa, that prices into the cost of doing your projects. It also makes investors very adverse to investing in your polity. An example would be, look at Senegal. Senegal has been relatively stable, one of the stable countries across West Africa. But we all saw what happened a few weeks ago with the protest and the riots on the street. Daya also spoke about government policy. So is government creating the right environment? Do we have adequate fiscal and incentives to encourage investors to continue to invest in the gas space? So those are some of the constraints that we see in the gas market in West Africa. I'd like to leave you with just this picture of our beloved Africa. As you can see, looking very dark. It's a challenge, but I also think it's an opportunity. I think it clearly shows that there's an opportunity to use gas within Africa and within West Africa, whether it's gas to power, whether it's gas to industry, whether it's export. But there is a huge gap, as we can see. The electricity per capita is, I think, in the 30s. And let's just take a few seconds, stare at this and let it ginger up the discussions and keep the discussions going as to what we can do to make lighting up Africa a reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that insightful presentation, Muji. I think there's a number of items that resonate with me personally there. One is we have some infrastructure already in place, following on from Darius' talk about lack of infrastructure, but we haven't fully utilized it. So there's a great opportunity to fully utilize that. And I actually like that idea of virtual pipelines to use the infrastructure further. Really great introduction on contracting strategy. Good to give people a bit of a feel for that involved. And I think the final one of the points you made around other countries actually thinking about when gas is discovered, making sure the infrastructure is flexible to actually get the gas to the places required. I think that, for me personally, would be very important for emerging gas provinces like Mozambique and Senegal as they begin to develop their gas industries to really make sure they don't fall into the same mistakes or errors that have happened in other African countries. So thank you very much for that, Muji. I'd like to bring on our third speaker now, Olayemi Odutola, to come and talk to us about West Africa domestic gas use with a focus on the Côte d'Ivoire LPG market. Over to you, Yemi.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for the Efikos for this platform, and then thank you for the audience for joining this webinar. I'm going to be talking to you about the domestic gas use in the West Africa sub-region, and then a case study of the Côte d'Ivoire LPG market. Okay, next slide, please. So basically, before we go into the LPG market in Côte d'Ivoire, I'd like to take you on a journey of how we get LPG in the first place. Basically, from the oil and gas extraction onshore and offshore. It comes with either crude or it's gas. It can be a gas, a platform. So let's take the upper route as route 1, and then we say it's a gas reserve. It's a gas reserve that has a platform, and then gas is taken into the natural gas processing plant. And from there, the LPG tanker takes the product into a refrigerated or pressurized storage terminal. That's where it's stored at a particular temperature. And then from there, It can either be transported by trucks or rail or an LPG tanker into a bulk storage facility, and then it is given to the bulk users, and then the bulk users take it to the bulk traders, and then it ends up with the consumers or in the cars. In the second route, which is lower, when we explore the onshore and offshore product platform, sometimes it comes with crude. So crude oil comes with gas as well. So let's take, for instance, we have an FPSO, floating production storage facility, say Bonga. We load a crude oil tanker. The crude oil tanker takes it to an oil refinery. It's say in the US, there's an oil refinery. The oil refinery blends, gets refines the crude. You get LPG, you get normal.
All right, I think we may have a connection issue with Yemi, but we'll just we'll give him a few moments and see if he can rejoin us shortly. So I think just to fill in the gap, as it were, while we wait for Yemi to try and rejoin us. I think he was talking about the oil and gas route for extraction and how that feeds into oil tankers and oil refineries, and then once you extract the LPG, then that can then be routed into LPG depots for onward distribution to either industrial users or domestic users for cooking and the like. So just moving ahead, just a few key figures here about West Africa and the LNG market. So West Africa as a whole has the biggest population center in Africa, and about 80% of the population is still reliant on biomass for cooking, which, as we'll all be aware, is both inefficient and also is harmful to the environment and not great for air quality either. The LPG consumption overall is dominated by 4 countries who consume about 85% of the LPG consumed in the West Africa sub-region. So that just gives you a sense of what the scale of the market is. Obviously, a very large population still unreached by clean cooking fuels, as you can see from that 80%. So a few advantages and disadvantages of LPG on this slide. Its overall advantages, it's practically smoke-free, relatively easy to handle, and efficient and easy to transport in terms of its energy density. It does not result in deforestation as it replaces wood use, and it emits lower greenhouse gas emissions per unit of energy compared to burning biomass or coal. As an economic advantage, it provides fuel diversity, as you're not only reliant on either liquid fuels or biomass, and can be used for an extended period of time in terms of the equipment required to use LPGs. And also on a social perspective, diversifying your energy mix and saving time because of the higher energy content can actually serve as an advantage as well. In terms of disadvantages, the market overall is underdeveloped, as we mentioned earlier on, especially in rural areas because of a lack of infrastructure and also in some areas irregular supply. From an environmental perspective, obviously the LPG is usually derived from some form of gas or crude oil exploitation, and if that isn't done within the right regulatory framework, you could have some environmental impacts from there. I can see Yemi is back with us now. So Yemi, I've just progressed your slides a bit for you, and we're on the LPG advantages and disadvantages. So I'll let you take over again.
Yeah, sorry about the glitch. We're still in West Africa. So I'd like to talk about the key fuel in Africa's energy transition, which is LPG. The advantages are that LPG is nearly smoke-free. It is easy to handle in terms of bottling them in cylinders and be able to transport them from one place to the other. It is efficient and is easily transported, like I said before. In terms of the environment, less deforestation if wood is used in terms of LPG. If LPG is used in terms replaced with wood, and then lower greenhouse gas emissions compared to burning of biomass or coal. Biomass here means coal or wood or firewood. In terms of economic advantages, we're talking about fuel diversity. It means either using a kerosene or petrol. And then in terms of infrastructure, where you have like an industrial site or something, it has a long operating life when you use LPG. On the social side, you have an addition to your diversified energy mix, be it solar, be it petrol for your generator, and be it LPG. So it just adds to your energy mix and it's sort of diversification. And then you can agree with me that it also saves time. So when you say Dio is always is a grandmaster at and barbecue with coal, I'm sure that if he tries LPG, he would be a whole lot better than the barbecue will come back faster. In terms of disadvantages, there are lots of underdevelopment markets, especially in the rural areas. There's inadequate infrastructure that has been overemphasized by the two speakers that spoke earlier. There's a regular supply because there's a huge dependence on imports. On the environmental bit, LPG, like other sources of energy, like crude, is exported from the ground and whatnot. So taking into consideration places like the Niger Delta, the LPG is gotten from the ground, and then we can see the pollution that's going on over there. So they're basically environmentally harmful sources. And then there's insufficient industry regulation. In terms of economic disadvantages, like I said before, the import dependency. So we have to rely on this side of the world. We have to rely on imports from Asia, from Europe, and from the US. From North America for supply. There's a high startup cost for supply and for processing natural gas, and there's a high running cost as well. There's a high OPEX. In terms of social, coming down to the grassroots right now, there can be issues of incomplete filling of cylinders. Like that's when you get to the retail aspect of it, and then the risk of explosion due to heat in storage, in taking into consideration issues that happen in Nigeria in terms of explosion. Next slide, please. Like Debola said before, we are going to be focusing on Cote d'Ivoire as a case study. So I'd like to take you on a little trip to Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire cannot be mentioned without being the #1 producer of cocoa. They're also on top 10 producers of coffee and cashew. They're not grossly dependent on oil like Nigeria. They have a population of 24.3 million. It's a francophone country and has a landmass of a third of Nigeria, 322,000 square kilometers. Now, the overview of the LPG markets in Cote d'Ivoire: 19,430 metric tons of LPG storage available, which is grossly inadequate. Consumption is increasing at the rate of 8 to 10% each year. LPG is distributed by cylinders, trucks, or rail. It's worthy to know that the GDP growth rate of Cote d'Ivoire has been on 8.5% pre-COVID. That's like one of the top 10 to 15 economies in the world in terms of GDP growth. The administrative capital of Cote d'Ivoire is not Abidjan, but Yamoussoukro. Abidjan is like the Lagos of Cote d'Ivoire, which is the economic capital, and it has is one of the 14 districts. Abidjan is like Lagos. It's has fruit processing plants, automobile, construction, and chemical industries, all the whole 9 yards. In terms of infrastructure, they have something that is similar to the Apapa Port in Nigeria. It's a canal. So they built a canal such that there's like a breakwater from the Atlantic Ocean. So a vessel that is coming into Abidjan will go into the canal to discharge whatever goods and products it has. And it's a major hub in this country. The map on the top right corner shows where Cote d'Ivoire is. Cote d'Ivoire is on it's bordered by 5 countries. It's a unique country. On the east is Ghana. On the top, on the northeast is Burkina Faso. In the northwest is Mali and Guinea on the side, and on the southwest is Liberia. Next slide, please. So here, this just shows the supply of butane gas in 2018. We're taking 2018 as a case study here. SIR here it's just the refinery. Cote d'Ivoire has a refinery, and it's a functional refinery. It's with an output of working capacity of 86%. Lion GPL here is the producing gas assets. Petrosi here is the national oil storage, national oil company, similar to NNPC. And basically, cumulative is just an addition of what the imported produced. So in here, SIR is just stating that SIR imported 41,000 metric tons of gas. This is to augment what they are producing and then supplying to their consumers or their customers. Here, the Lion GPL is an asset as such. It's not they cannot import. You're not allowed to import. Petrosi is the national oil company, so they import, and they imported 299,000 metric tons. So the cumulative there is 340,000 metric tons. When we go to the production part, it shows that the refinery produced 18,000 metric tons, about 18,000 metric tons, and then the Lion assets, which is the producing gas assets, produced 10,000 metric tons. So there's a cumulative of 28,000 metric tons. So when you look at the total cumulative on the extreme, you see that be it importation and production by the refinery, it's 59,000 metric tons. The exploration asset produced 10,000 metric tons, and the national oil company imported 299,000 metric tons, which comes to a total of 369,000 metric tons. So this is basically the supply of the market. When you look down, it's just basically a graph showing you an historical from 2000 to 2008. You can see that in terms of the production from the processing plant and the refinery is basically constant, but in terms of the supply, from importation, it's on the increase. Next slide, please. So next slide just shows volume of demand. Like I showed you in the map before, Cote d'Ivoire is a very unique country surrounded by 5 countries. 2 of them are landlocked, so which are Burkina Faso and Mali, which are grossly dependent on other countries around them to supply products. This map, this table here shows the exports and the domestic consumption. The exports in 2014, you can see the exponential growth from 2,980 to 14,000 to 7,000 to 14,000 and then to 56,000 in 2020. So basically, this export is to Burkina Faso and Mali, and then 1 or 2 cargoes to Guinea. To Guinea, there has been an increase of 5 to 10% or more than that in terms of domestic consumption that you can see in the middle row, and then basically the lower row is the exports of the total demand. So because they are grossly dependent, and the Mali and Burkina Faso are grossly dependent on the countries around them, especially Cote d'Ivoire, the government of Cote d'Ivoire tends to take domestic consumption first as priority before they start to export to the other countries. The slide below shows exports to Burkina Faso and Mali. Mali being blue and Burkina Faso being orange. Next slide, please. So here is basically talking about Cote d'Ivoire and then showing you the map of Cote d'Ivoire and then the distribution by consumption. When we say packaging, we're talking about the bottling. When we're talking about the bottling, B6, B12, B25, B26, B6 is basically the small cylinders that are 6 kg. The next cylinders are the 12.5 kg, which are very predominant in Nigeria. 25 kg is basically what is used in restaurants or bigger houses, and then 28 kg and so on and so forth. So if you look at the map here, the population is on the left and the consumption is on the right. So you can see that where the hub is Abidjan, 51% of whatever comes into the country is consumed in Abidjan. And then the south leverages on the fact that it's closer to Abidjan to consume more of the product. And then on the west, it's 5%. In the center, it's 13% because it's closer to the south. North is 1%, 1.9% in terms of consumption, and then the east, far east is 4.59%. Next slide, please. So yes, so when we come to the challenges, I'll be able to expatiate further on what you have seen in the previous slide. In terms of awareness on LPG, there's health and environmental benefits of LPG that are sometimes not known. In the north, it takes a whole lot of government intervention, a whole lot of campaign and whatnot to be able to sensitize the populace on the benefits of LPG and then the environmental effects. In terms of improper use of lack of maintenance of LPG cylinders, usually LPG cylinders are supposed to be recertified every 10 years, and then the pipes that are supposed to transport LPG from the cylinder to your gas cooker is supposed to be certified every 5 kg. And so some of those things are not known by some of us and then general populace. In terms of availability, the storage capacities are insufficient. Like I said before, about 19,500 is grossly insufficient. And then if you don't have sufficient capacity, you would have to bring in imports as often as possible in order to quell deficit in supply. In terms of availability as well, we are grossly dependent on LPG imports. because they're not gas assets that are producing what can be used as an alternative to LPG imports. Means another challenge is affordability. The low-income households have low disposable income. If I'm earning $100,000 a month as salary, I don't see why would I would pay $30 to $60 for a cylinder and for gas when that's not the only thing I'm going to be paying for my salary. Also, we have to look at the flip side. If we're talking in terms of affordability, we have to talk about the government subsidies that can be used for this, that can be used for other sectors. If government is subsidizing LPG, and then there's a growth, and there's a and then people embrace LPG, the subsidy will continue to grow, and then this subsidy can be also used for other sectors. In terms of supply security, there's an increased demand of LPG from different sectors, which can lead in the conflicts in the middle to long term. So basically, there's a functional refinery that produces gasoline and gas oil, and then if there's a huge demand on LPG, there will be a neglect in other energy mix in terms of diesel and then gasoline. In terms of regulation, there's limited regulation, which has led to hoarding in black markets. So basically, when there's a supply glitch, people tend to hoard cylinders and then wait for people to be desperate so that you can sell at higher prices. And then obviously there are cases of fraud in terms of refilling of gas cylinders. Next slide, please. So yeah, coming to opportunities for investment in Cote d'Ivoire, you can invest in a LPG storage terminal. I've overemphasized the fact that there's limited storage. I'm fortunate to be on a project that's going to increase capacity by 60%. And then there are other players in the market. So we anticipate by 2023, the current capacity of Cote d'Ivoire would have doubled. In terms of LPG bottling plants, that's the only way you can reach the final consumer. So even if you put the product in the storage terminal, it has to get into the cylinders, and that's where the bottling plant comes in. The product has to be filled into the bottling plant and then taken to the retail outfits. So basically, they're either bulk cylinder retail sellers or just people that live on the corner side that sell cylinders, sell gas with cylinders on the side. And there's this a sort of business where you have a filling station or a skid, so to speak, which is very good for low-income earners. It's basically buying what you can afford. So when you bring a 6 kg cylinder, for instance, you can be sold 1,500. It doesn't have to be full. It's just basically what you want. And so that's an opportunity for investment as well. In terms of transportation, this is also an avenue for investment, opportunity for investment as well, where you can be able to transport from A to B. We have, and the other map I showed you showed like a deficit in terms of supply to the north of 1.9% in comparison to Abidjan, which was 51%. So LPG trucks can push products all the way to the north. Right now, at the moment, there are no pipelines that will run to the north, and then the north is closer to the landlocked countries of Mali or Burkina Faso. So they are left at the mercy of trucks or to rail or cylinders. So an avenue for investment is basically trucking to discharge into smaller facilities. Also, to reach the consumer, you have to produce LPG cylinders. There are different LPG cylinder sizes from, like I showed you before, 6 kg to 12 kg to 25 kg to 38 kg. And then of recent, there are other cylinders, composite cylinders that can be produced that are lighter, they're a little bit more expensive, but they're a lot more safe. The body is produced with fiberglass, and then the inside is with steel, which holds the product. They're a lot more safer. And then recently I read that a company just launched a production outfit or a factory in Nigeria in Bayelsa State 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it's going to be one of the top 5 composite cylinder manufacturing companies in the world. So that's very remarkable, and it encourages people to be able to lift cylinders, to be able to use gas cylinders, and then I think it will propagate the word. Next slide, please. Yeah, future trends in Cote d'Ivoire and West Africa as a whole. We see, I foresee an increased consumption of LPG industrially and domestically. This, like I said, there's a trend of 8 to 5% increase in the consumption in Cote d'Ivoire, and then this spans across the West African coast. Because when I talk to my colleagues in the other West African countries, they say the same. There's a huge embrace of LPG despite the challenges. There will also be increased investment in storage infrastructure and LPG value chain as a whole. Like I said before, I'm involved in a project right now that will increase the current LPG storage facility in Cote d'Ivoire by 60%. And there are some other guys that are trying to increase it by 40%. So in the year 2023, the storage facility of Cote d'Ivoire would have doubled. Governments will continue to increase awareness in line with the SDG goals of Goals 3 and Goal 7. Goals 3 is basically health, and Goal 7 is basically clean energy. So in Cote d'Ivoire, there's a conscious effort by the government to continue to create awareness, and then basically part of the effort to create awareness is continue to build kind of storages and do PPPs, public-private partnerships with the private sector to increase consumption. To increase the distribution and then supply chain to create awareness for the eventual consumers. And then government is also increasing its intervention in the ease of doing business. It's just not just about bringing investors. There has to be like an ease of doing business, the ease of bringing in money, and then less taxation, tax haven, issues of multiple taxes, like in Nigeria. They're making an effort to reduce it, to reduce taxes, multiple taxes, and to reduce the bureaucracy that comes with opening to setting up companies and doing business in Cote d'Ivoire. And yes, like an investor, there's an avenue to increase your revenue as a project sponsor or an investor. We expect that there are going to be a few cases of incidents as a result of increased usage. That is normal because the rate at which the consumption is growing is limited by the current capacity. And as long as the capacity increases, there's going to be a huge spike in consumption. So we are hoping that the regulators can manage the eventual increase in consumption but expect that your 1 or 2 glitches that would come with that. That brings me to the end of my presentation, but thank you. But I would like to leave you with the fact that gas creates jobs, gas creates increase in revenue, gas creates industrialization, and gas is the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yemi, for that really detailed presentation and insights and perspectives on Cote d'Ivoire. Really appreciate the level of details you've provided there. There's a few things that really caught my attention. One was around the role of civil society and advocacy for increasing this goal of increasing use of clean cooking fuels like LPG. So it's not just an engineering or financial or regulatory challenge. You literally need all aspects of society to chip in to actually make this really happen. And I like that last point about capacity. There's a lot of pent-up demand, as you mentioned. So there are opportunities for investors to come in and actually play a role here. And there's opportunities to be profitable and to make a significant impact on people's lives. So thank you very much for that presentation. So now we'll be moving into our panel discussion and Q&A session. And I would like to hand over to another member of the Efikos team, Balumi Mustafa, who will be taking us through this session. Balumi, would you like to come on and introduce yourself, please?
Hi, Debola. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Balumi Mustafa, as Debola mentioned earlier. I'm a member of the Efikos team, and this evening I'll be here to anchor the panel discussion and the Q&A session. Firstly, I'd like to say a very big thank you to all our panelists that came on today. I'm sure we've all been able to garner a few tips from them, a few key points from everything they've said. And to kick off this session, we're going to start very easy, go from our easy questions and work our way up. And then once we're done with our panel session, then we open the floor to all the questions that the audience have put in the Q&A box. And in case you have a question as we go on, please still feel free to put them in. I'll make sure I go through as much questions as I can go through during the time we have. So thank you. So starting for our 3 panelists, we're going to start with the easy questions, as they mentioned. What short-term and long-term impact on gas utilization and gas markets are we expecting to see following the entry of Dangote into the energy space? So I think we can start with Dayo, Muji. Anybody can just jump in as soon as they have their answer ready.
Okay, I can go first.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, I think Dangote's entry into the downstream fuel space. So this is downstream selling petrol or selling diesel. I don't think would have an effect on gas utilization. I think those are two separate industries. But in terms of whether it would displace gas as a fuel, I think that it will be interesting to see the numbers that Dangote would sell at. So typically, and all things being equal, gas is typically cheaper than diesel or HFO or marine oil, for example. So it'll be interesting to see what figures Dangote will be selling his fuel at, and then we'll be able to make a call as to whether it's able to displace gas as an alternative fuel.
Thank you so much. Dayo, Yemi, any addition?
Yeah, for me, I think the entry of Dangote into the petroleum refining space has been grossly exaggerated, and that's basically my personal opinion in terms of the sub-region, because there are already functional refineries in the sub-region, and in terms of gas, I don't see any changes. Dangote is a businessman for the first thing, and he doesn't run a charity organization. So is basically going to be supplying based on the world economic scale and then benchmarks. So I don't see him selling beyond below the prevailing price. And then his emphasis in terms of his refinery is not into gas. So I don't see any changes in terms of supply or distribution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't think Dayo is here. Dayo?
No, I think
Okay,
the guys have
okay.
done that justice. So let's, in the interest
Okay.
of time.
Okay, thank you. So the next question here is what policies can be put in place to make the expansion of production and supply of gas better in Sub-Saharan Africa?
Can you come again?
What policies can be put in place to make the expansion of production and supply of gas better in Sub-Saharan Africa?
Okay. For me, in terms of product, I have to upstream, and I'll defer to Muji and Yemi as we go further downstream. I think it's important for us to have the right fiscals in place. Gas as it is not on its own as lucrative as oil. So you can't expect to have the same kind of government take in terms of levies and taxes. So you need to fiscally incentivize investors. That's number one. Number two, which I think is more important, is you need some form of regulatory consistency. So there's a lot of between governments as we move from governments to governments. So in order to actually to encourage investment, which will then support production, you actually need to have people need to be sure that, because you see these investments are long-term in nature. So you want people to know that if I'm going to be investing 1 billion over 5 years, it's not that in year 6, because governments have changed, then the terms on which I made the investment will change. So once you know that there's also consistency in policy, it also helps. So it's one, getting the right fiscal incentives in place. Number two, ensuring that there's consistent policy.
Thank you so much. Muji, Yemi, anything to add?
Yeah, just I think for me, it's just the end-to-end planning. And we must recognize that gas is very different from oil. With oil, you have an international market. So once you produce, you just go to the market and you sell. With gas, it doesn't work like that. You cannot store gas. So the government needs to ensure that there's an end-to-end planning, think through the production, from production to the facilities, and then to the market. And when I say market, for example, would be, let's take Nigeria as an example. We all know that the power sector is the biggest user of gas in Nigeria. So if you wanted to expand domestic gas utilization in Nigeria, you need to fix the power sector, ensure that you have cost-reflective tariffs in the power sector. Only then, when you have cost-reflective tariffs, will the GenCos, the generating companies, be able to take gas and pay for the gas that you're taking. So that planning needs to be done upfront, especially for countries that are just discovering gas as a resource.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yemi, anything to add?
I think in terms of this question, I think they've done justice to it. On the trading perspective, basically, it's not just something that you jump into in terms of gas. It's not like crude where you can be a broker and then you get an FOB price on this side and then you sell on the other side. It takes a lot of competency and a whole lot of knowing the market. It's an investment that is slow but has steady returns, and then it's capital intensive. So you just jump in and jump out. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I know we've heard a lot about capital intensiveness of getting the gas out, and also the price of gas in the market as compared to oil. So that brings me to my next question, which is how viable is it to continue investing in export-driven gas projects, given the international glut in gas? And it's a two-pronged question. And then, can domestic or intra-African exports replace the focus on exports to Europe or Asia? I could say it again if you want me to.
I'm not sure if it's me, but it looks like you're breaking up.
Okay, I'll say it once again. It says, how viable is it to continue investing in export-driven gas projects, given the international glut in gas? And can domestic or intra-African exports replace the focus on exports to Europe or Asia?
Okay, I'll take the first part. I don't understand. I don't know about the gluts in the gas industry. It's basically like any other industry. It's your price. What is your cost price, and then what price are you selling? So I don't understand what you mean by the glut in the industry, because there's always a market for your produce in terms of gas. And then when you're talking, what's your question? The other question, I missed it.
I've said, how viable is it to continue investing in export-driven gas projects?
Well, it's viable. Everybody is investing in it. You can see, as in evidence in Mozambique, in Qatar, there's a market for gas, for LNG, for LPG. And then if anybody in West Africa or in Africa is producing LPG, everybody will be in West Africa will be ready to buy instead of going to the Asias and the Americas for product to secure your supply. Thank you.
Thank you. Dayo, Muji, anything to add?
Just to quickly add to what Yemi has said, I don't think it's either or. I think it depends on the situation of the country. And what do I mean by that? Let me give Egypt as an example. Egypt used to be an exporter of gas, maybe like 15 years ago. But when there was a huge increase in domestic demand for gas, they turned to be net importers of gas. So depending on where you are as a country, you may decide to do both, or you might decide to either do LNG imports or LNG exports. So if you take Nigeria, for example, our gas markets are not very well developed, and there's also the discussion around creditworthy customers. So you find out that for the IOCs, why won't I do my exports instead of just leaving the gas on the ground? That ends revenue for the government, and government can use that revenue to try and support economic development for their country. So it depends on, from my perspective, it depends on what phase that country is in terms of domestic gas utilization.
Dayo, anything to?
Yeah, so the only thing I'm going to say is that before you decide to invest in a gas plant for exports, you do your economics. And when you're running your economics, you're running what we call life cycle economics. So you're running your economics from now till when you call an end of field life, when you deplete the gas resources. And in running those economics, you need to have price assumptions. Now, if you're going to finance with a bank, I can tell you for free that the bank will be using what you call lowercase prices. So they are going to be stress testing your economics at some of the lowest prices that can obtain. So before you get into making a final investment decision, at least for exports, you would have run those economic cases. So it has nothing to do with glut or not. There'll always be a demand. It might subdue the price for an extended period of time, but you would have run your economics, and as long as it's economic for you, you can still invest regardless of the price, because you would have run it at that price or even at lower prices.
Okay, thank you so much. So at this point in time, I think we're just going to delve straight into the questions being asked by the participants. And the very first question is for Muji. An anonymous attendee asks, she says, aside LPG, what are the other opportunities in the gas ecosystem?
So aside LPG, there are a number of opportunities in the gas ecosystem. It includes one, gas to industries, which is just supplying gas to industries for them to use either for power or for process. There's also gas to power, which is just supplying gas to power plants. There's also exports that we just spoke about, which is LNG. So you can decide to play, where you think you're best suited to play across the value chain. Do you want to do processing? You can go to maybe a supplier and decide to process gas for the person and build gas processing facilities, or you can decide to play in the downstream sector where you're just a local distributor of gas in the country. So that's a range of options to play in the gas ecosystem.
Thank you. And for Dio, the same anonymous SND has a question for you.
Okay.
He'd like to, he says, to be more specific, what opportunities are there for SMEs in the gas ecosystem, aside LPG again?
Well, I'm not sure. That's that question. I can adequately address it. Apart from LPG, what other opportunities there are? I think I'll throw this one straight to Yemi and Muji. I play the upstream. I'm not shy. I'm not shy to throw my hands up when it's not my area of specialty.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so I play in the upstream, not.
Yeah, the big ticket man now. So let's deal with the.
No, there's no big ticket.
Okay, in terms of SMEs, like I'd mentioned in my slides, there's a distribution deficit in the sub-region. So the person can deal with retail in terms of distribution of cylinders. The person can play in the markets where there's kits, where you can sell whatever it is that the buyer is buying at a specific amount. You can sell this the corresponding gas that the buyer is willing to sell. In terms of distribution, you can also buy like a truck where you can load trucks from the Apapa depot where there's LPG and distribute. You can also create an app where you can have LPG where people can do like the diesel app where you can click on a couple of buttons and somebody will bring diesel to your house. You can also do that for LPG. So there's a wild area where you can play in terms of an SME coming into the gas space. I hope I've addressed the person's concerns.
Yes,
Thank
and just
you.
to add on, Pelumi, to Yemi's point is, I think in LPG space, there's a huge opportunity for bottling. So I've heard a number of people talk in the industry and they say we don't have enough cylinders for LPG. So that's another space that an SME can play in, going to manufacturing or importation of these cylinders. You don't actually have to do the bottling of the cylinders, but just the acquisition of the actual cylinders is big business because there's a huge gap in that market.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, Momoji, for the question. The next question that we're going to bring in from Mr. Oluwasegun Odukoya. He's asking why utilization is low in the WAPI. Is it due to demand? But I'm sure it's not that. But he wants to know why it's so low in the WAPI pipeline.
That's a great question. And from my perspective, I think utilization is low both from a demand and supply cause and effect. So what do I mean by that? In terms of supply, so the WAPI was premised on just one source of supply, which was from Nigeria. And when you have just one source of supply, if anything happens to that source, then you're in trouble. So think of Niger Delta issues and vandalism. So there were periods where there was not enough gas flowing through the WAPI. And the countries that depended on the WAPI for gas had to look for alternative means of getting gas. And as these countries now started to discover gas themselves, Ghana as an example, they started to do projects to supply their own gas instead of relying on the WAPI. So that's how supply is the cost of capacity underutilization. Then when I talk of demand, so obviously there had to be a commercial basis that underpinned the construction of the WAPI. But what happened over time was most of those power plants were not built, or maybe even if they were built, the amount of power that they were generating wasn't the initial estimate on which the WACP, the commercial of the WACP was based on. So if you don't have enough demand, what happened was the tariffs had to go up because the demand wasn't there. And when the tariffs went up on the WACP, it made the price of gas not very competitive. So that also affected utilization. So to sum it up, it's both a supply issue and a demand issue.
Thank you so much. And the next question is not more of a question, it's more of a statement. Mr. Patrick Udetriku, he says, when we talk about Africa, it's easy to think Sub-Saharan Africa only. However, North Africa has excellent gas infrastructure and overall utilization. Lessons are there to be learned for the rest of Africa. Any comments on this?
Yes, case in point, Egypt. Egypt has fantastic infrastructure, and it's just what the government has done over the last, I would say, 7 years. So there was a huge investment in infrastructure. There was, they went through these licensing rounds and they signed a number of exploration contracts with international oil and gas companies. There was a deliberate effort to increase the gas reserves and infrastructure. There was also a growing demand in the Egyptian economy for gas. So everything tied together, it just worked. There was a demand, and the government did everything to ensure that the supply matched the demand. So yes, he's right. Egypt is a very good example of how gas commercialization should be done in an integrated manner.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, can I just add to that? Sorry, just a quick comment. Yeah, I just want to say that, you see, it's always important, like Muji said, that it has to be done in an integrated manner. You see, a government that sets policies in place to ensure that supply is increased also needs to be matched by people that demand for this product at a competitive price. So one of the problems we have with power that affects the upstream in terms of utilization of gas is that you know that there is no willing buyer at the commercial price, either because we have very low purchasing power as a society, or we have FX issues, or we have government policies that just make people not trust that I have to pay a higher price for power, and it then translates into further upline into more generation. So there's that, have a low trust deficit or a trust deficit society, then it's very difficult. So like Moji said, you can't pick one in isolation. It's actually you have to look at it holistically, that for me to be able to increase supply, then somebody must be willing to pay the right price for power downstream. And until we're able to address it as a problem, one problem as against setting different policies for different aspects of the value chain, I'm not sure we'll be able to get it right.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Patrick again has another question, but this time it's for Yemi. He says 92% of Cote d'Ivoire's LPG supply is via import. Where does the supply come from?
So the supply is brought in by the national oil company, and then the national oil company has contract that he has signed up, long-term contract that he has signed up with two trading companies in order to hedge the risk of fluctuation in prices. So they've signed a long-term contract with two trading companies, and then they bring it from the US or from Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One more question from Mr. Oluwasegun Odukoya. He says, what is the impact of pricing on LPG development and its infrastructure? This is open to all panelists. What is the impact of pricing on LPG development and its infrastructure?
The impact of pricing and its development. In terms of pricing, it depends on
upstream, the
I think
this is
I think you're breaking up.
you can't say. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yes.
Yeah. So in terms of pricing, you can't. There are different fields. There's the upstream, there's the midstream, and then there's the downstream. So you can't really. You have to be specific exactly what parts of the value chain you're talking about to be able to talk about the effect on the eventual consumer or the client.
From his line of questioning, I would think he's going for upstream production. What is the impact of pricing on LPG development and its infrastructure?
So let me try and take this. Basically, the thing is, like I said, when you're trying to develop infrastructure or you're trying to move a project forward, at least to bring out the gas from the ground, either for LPG or say for an LNG, for example. Now, you run your economics. Price is a fantastic input into your economics, but is an input that you cannot control. So for project finance guys, price is not just the only thing we look at, but basically what the price does is, even for example, now I'll give you an example. I worked on a project finance a few years ago when oil price was maybe like 60 or 65, and the bankers were not willing to go above 45 per barrel. But eventually, if you look at what happened last year, prices went to 20. So because it's a very uncontrollable factor, as much as possible, you try to keep price, the effect of price on your economics to as little or as possible. So you keep your price factor, so you want to go with the lowest price possible. So it doesn't matter if the prices go up today, or it still would not really factor into what you're going to develop, because at the end of the day, you're not going to be working with the price of the day. You're looking at it from a life cycle perspective. So for me, I feel like there are more important factors in terms of developing the gas infrastructure, especially from an upstream perspective, than price. There is the fact that you want to make sure that you have the right policies in place, such that whatever the price is, the project will still be economic.
Thank you so much, Dayo. Muji, anything to add on that, or do we go to the next question? Okay. So one more for Mr. Patrick. Thank you. One more for Mr. Patrick. This is for all panelists to jump on. He says, the opportunities I see are in gas policy advocacy to incentivize upstream gas development, infrastructure financing, and regional manufacturing of major equipment in the value chain, e.g. LPG storage tanks, which unfortunately are still being produced basically in China or India. So it's more of a statement, and he just wants to hear your feedback on the statement.
I can jump on this. In terms of the value chain, on the mid to downstream bits, there's so many opportunities to jump on and to partner with the government or go solo as a private investor. In terms of, there's gross inadequacy in terms of storage infrastructure. That's why countries like Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire and Nigeria, to be specific, have to have distribution problems. When you have storage infrastructure where you can store products and then you can push them out into the bulk buyers, then it will create awareness where you can push products to the eventual bulk buyers and then the eventual consumers. But there's a huge case of inadequacy of storage, and then it's an issue, and then it's an opportunity for investments. That said, when you push in products to the storage facility, the eventual consumer is not just going to come with his cup or his plates to come and get the LPG. It has to come in the cylinders, and then there's an opportunity to get people to invest in gas filling plants where they can store the gas in the cylinders, and then they push it to the eventual to the bulk buyers and then the sellers. So in terms of the cylinders here, there are two plays. Either you import the cylinders from China or from somewhere cheaper, or you create a company where you can produce the cylinders locally. Now, when you import the cylinders from China, there's so much that the regulator can do. The regulator is not going to check all the cylinders. They're not going to put in people that will check all the cylinders for leakages and whatnot. So there's a problem there. There's a gap there. So they can't check whether the integrity of those cylinders that you're bringing in. However, if you have a company set up in Nigeria or Codivo or Ghana, for instance, you have where you're welding the cylinders and then you just bring in the steel and whatnot. There's a way where the regulators can come into your facility and then they do spot checks on the bottles that you have welded or that you have built or that you have produced, so they can do spot checks and whatnot. But if you are importing 3 million bottles, for instance, from China, the truth is that nobody's going to have the time to sit down over 3 million bottles and check whether the integrity of one bottle is good. So there might be a problem there in terms of integrity of the bottles and whatnot. But going back to what Mr. Patrick Udechukwu said, there's so many parts of the value chain that you can invest in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
Just a quick one. I mean, from a broad policy perspective, lots of advocacy that's at least in Nigeria, it's resulted in the draft PIB that has at least compared to oil, very generous gas terms. And there's a recognition, I think, from policymakers that there needs to be a deliberate effort to incentivize people to invest in gas. First of all, maybe because we don't even have as much oil as we do gas. So from even a survival perspective, you need to start looking at investing in gas to bring that resource from the ground. Also because there's so much need, not just say Nigeria. Nigeria has the highest gas reserves in the region. So I would like to focus on Nigeria, not just in Nigeria, but there's so much need across the sub-region. And even if you can just lay it across the West African coast, like the West African pipeline, you can easily supply 5, 6, 7, 8 countries from the resource that you have. So there's a need for it. There's the resource. All we just need to do is marry. And there's a lot of advocacy that's going on. You see, the thing is, because oil was relatively easy money in terms of it had come in, by the time we knew what we were doing, production had started, there had not been as much focus on gas. Now the focus is coming, but there's a lot of work to be done in terms of, you cannot have the approach you have as governments in terms of government take to oil that you have to gas. There are two different resources. They have different kinds of, what do you call it now? Different kinds of returns on your investment. So an investor might not be as incentivized to do gas as they would to do oil because the revenue is not as high. So the work going on there is more like, how can we marry this resource we have in the ground with the demand that we have and ensure that the government is able to look through the value chain to ensure that, we get power to the people, we make money in the process, we invest in our gas, we even improve the environment, because gas is cleaner source of energy than the current ones we have at the moment. Now, the advocacy will never end. There's been some progress, I have to admit, with the PIB, but until it's passed, you don't know where we stand with that. So I agree with you, Mr. Patrick. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but I know work is being done, and we can see the results in the draft PIB that has so much more generous gas terms, recognizing the need to develop gas and incentivize that development than we do for oil.
Thank you so much, Daya. Thank you so much. So to wrap up our Q&A session, we'll have the final question from Muji. It says, if you were to identify 2 key lessons learned from the limited success of the WAGP, what would they be?
Thanks, Malumi. I think we touched on that earlier in the discussions. I think one is make sure that you diversify your source of supply so that you're not underpinning a 700-kilometer pipeline on just one source of supply. What happens when that supply gets interrupted? I think the second would be to ensure that if we're building such a pipeline, we have a good line of sight to the projects that would underpin, the gas that will be transported by the pipeline. So if you're going to build a 700-kilometer pipeline, what are the power plants that are going to take gas? You want to make sure that you understand the project schedules when those power plants come on stream, to ensure that you have enough capacity utilization of the pipeline, because that also drives the tariff that will be charged by the pipeline. And the tariff also is part of what the final cost of gas would be. So those would be two key lessons from the current experience with WAGP.
Thank you so much, Muji. So at this point, we'd like to close the Q&A session, and like to say our final thank yous to all our panelists for answering all the questions being raised by the audience superbly. And once again, thank you the audience also for joining us today. And I'll hand over to our anchor, Debola, to close the session.
Thank you very much, Pelumi, and a big thank you to our panelists for all your contributions today. If I wanted to start listing all the various points and useful pieces of information I've gained from this webinar, I'd probably be here for quite a while. So I'd encourage you all to, listen back to the recording, pay attention, pick up valuable pieces of information. But I think ending on that note, that the advocacy cannot stop for increasing gas usage. We all need to kind of keep banging on the drum and doing all our parts really to encourage increased gas usage for that goal of really powering Africa's future and really improving energy access, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa. I'd like to say another big thank you to our panelists and just give them a few moments to say a final shout out to anyone if they would like to at this point. Dayo?
Well, I would just like to thank the guys. It's always good to be asked to come back. It means that you either did very badly, they wanted to come and redeem your image, or they think you have some value to add. I'd like to thank Yemi and Muji. To gas, apart from the upstream, is not a field, at least after the upstream, is not a field I'm familiar with. So I actually learned quite a lot from them, and I think the enduring image I'm living with is Muji's last slide. It's the most powerful slides are the ones without words. I think the challenge for us is to find a way to ensure that our continent does not remain being the dark continent. I think that's, for me, that's the enduring image I'm taking from this. Thanks, Muji, for that. It's really quite striking. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dayo.
All right, should I go next?
Yes, please.
All right, thank you guys for listening in, and a very big thank you to the Efikos group for inviting me to come and share the little that I know. And thank you to Dayo and Yemi. It was a very, very interesting topic. I think that the gas industry is very exciting, especially in West Africa, and I dare say Nigeria, because it's emerging. So there's a huge opportunity to influence, whether it's through policy or advocacy. So I encourage us all to keep the discussion going. And I know that with time, would make that impact that we're all looking, the change that we're all desiring to see when it comes to gas utilization across West Africa and indeed Nigeria. So thank you very much. It was a wonderful experience.
Thank you. I haven't forgotten about the fitness tips, so we may have run out of time now, but I'll definitely be in touch.
No worries.
Yemi, any final words?
Yeah, thank you very much for the Efikos group, especially Tolu Awudere, who bullied me into this session. In terms of the projects that are already going on in terms of for the future, and I'm going to improve infrastructure. We just need to continue to push in terms individually and as a group. Advocacy is key for clean energy and for good health. There's so many problems in Africa, and getting clean energy off the books is just one of it. The medium age of for Africa is about 55, survival age about 55 to 56. We can increase that and then remove clean energy as one of our issues. I think it's key that we continue to push and create awareness in terms of clean energy, solar, LPG, CNG, and what have you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yemi. And on that note, I would like to bring today's webinar to a close. Thank you very much for your attention and joining us today. If you've got any feedback, comments, or suggestions for future webinars, we'd like to hear from you. You can email us at our email address, efikos@efikos.co.uk, or you could leave a message on our LinkedIn profile as well, or just respond to the email you received to register for this webinar. Thank you very much, and hope you can join us next time for our next webinar. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Deva.